Hi guys, in this tutorial we are going to look at the Java Reflection API. So this tutorial serves as an introduction to reflection. And the assumption is that you haven't done any reflection API so far, or you don't know what reflection is. And so in this tutorial we're going to do two things. I'm going to call them magic tricks, if you will. And reflection allows us to inspect the Java language at pretty much architectural level. It allows us to check what fields there are in a particular class, what methods there are, and not only expect but also modify. So for the first trick, I'm going to run a method without explicitly calling it. And for the second trick, I'm going to make a string disappear. I hope that you're intrigued now, and after this video, your perspective or your view on the Java language will not be the same, I can guarantee that. So, let's create some stuff. Right, what we'll need is an entry point from which we can then move. So, we're going to create a class called class1. You can call it whatever you want, really. And we're going to have private static void some method. This is a private static method, as you can see. Private access modifier means you can only call this method from this class. Static means you do not need an instance to call this method. So you can call it from the class. And to make sure that it runs, we can say method executed. Let's go back. Right, so you can see both of these things now. So let's call this method without actually calling it. So field, no, actually we don't need field. We need a method. And the one to import is javalang.reflect. This allows us to reference this method as an object. This probably is a bit overwhelming, especially if you haven't done any functional programming. Objects are methods, methods are objects. So, you know, just keep that in mind. You don't need to understand this fully, but just ensure that you understand that this method as an object points to this method as a reference rather than an object. Right, so we can then obtain the reference by using className.class get declared something. So you can see that there are a lot of stuff you can actually inspect. The one we need is get declared method some method as the name. And you will need to add throws exception here to make sure this goes away, because there are so many exceptions that can be thrown. Right, so we're now referencing this method from class 1 in this object. Now that we can reference it, we can also make it accessible. Now, why do we need to do this? Recall that it's a private method, so I don't have the rights to access it in this class called reflect, because it's in a different class. Now that I made it accessible just like that, using one line of code, which is super cool, I can call it. Now, invoke takes two things. One is the object on which you're invoking. This is a static method. Static methods do not require objects on which you can call them methods. So I'm just going to pass in null, because there is no object on which I'm calling this method. As for the parameters, there are none in this method. It doesn't take anything, so I'm not going to pass in anything else. And we can just run this and see what happens. It says method executed, which basically means that we called this method without explicitly calling it. So at this point, you're probably feeling what Neo was feeling when he was introduced first to the matrix. And this is really powerful, so make sure you don't misuse it, and great power leads to using it wisely, kind of thing, you know. So also a couple of things to note. Since this is introduction, I'm going to talk about the changes that have been made into to the reflection API since Java 9, especially with the module system. It works slightly differently. So if you're not using Java 8, then just heads up. Right, so this is first trick complete. This should be reasonably straightforward. We've got the method reference for that thing. We made it accessible since we wanted to get rid of private, and we called it. Right, so that's that. I'm going to move this somewhere here so it doesn't obscure the view. Now, for the next part is, what was that? Yeah, string. We're going to make string disappear. Let's call it hello world. It actually is more awesome than it sounds, because Java strings are immutable, or supposed to be immutable. And they are, from the perspective of a normal approach, the normal user developer case scenario, strings are immutable. However, with Java reflection, you get, as we've already seen, godlike powers, so you can do pretty much anything you want. Right, so let's just do some simple stuff. Begin, print s, end. What do you think is going to happen here? Well, we'll probably print begin, hello world, and then end. Yep, that's what it does. So what we're going to do now is we're going to obtain a reference to the field that is the actual string contents. And you can know this by simply examining what the class contains. The very first thing you see is this char array, which is called value. Again, it's private, so we need to be able to access it. But first, we're going to obtain a reference to that field. String class get declared field value. I like how IntelliJ IDE gives me the prompt. It actually probably inspects that before I call this, and so it can give you all the stuff that exists in there. Anyway, we're going to make it accessible, and we're going to set object. So there are two parameters. The first one is, again, the instance on which we're calling. So this thing is not static, which means it belongs to an instance. So we need to pass in the instance, which is s. And now we can pass in the actual value. This variable is of type char array, so we can do the same thing. Pass in empty char array. Okay, so we made it disappear, which is pretty cool. We have begin, we have nothing, and we have end. And it's nothing because we've overwritten this char array, which actually is the storage for the string. So from the perspective of, well, technically speaking, strings are not immutable because you can do that. But again, in the normal approach, everything's fine. Strings are still immutable, so don't get confused. And, you know, it's just any char array. You can pass in anything you want. You can say my world and then convert that to char array and then, you know, call the same thing. It'll still run, it'll still execute. And we've just overwritten the value of this string object to by world. Okay, so in this short video tutorial thing. We covered introduction to Java Reflection API. It's not necessarily an introduction, but more of a demonstration of what can be done. There's quite a lot of stuff that you can read about on Reflection, especially on Oracle tutorials. That would be the starting point, I would say. And hopefully you are now familiar with what reflection generally means. And don't forget to vote on the next video or future videos. Thanks for watching.